I wonder what the first performance was of UC Berling. I just looked at that story right now and I realized that that's a weird item.
Everyone loves Bjorling.
I know, but where and what? That's such a, not enough detail.
Could be anywhere. It's a mystery.
He just came to New York City and stood on Ellis Island and sang.
He was busking, you know.
On the Dallas Opera Network, you're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's Opera Box Score. I'm your host, George Cederquist, joined on America's talk radio show about opera by Oliver Camacho, Matt Cummings, Weston Williams, and Ashlee Hardgrave. All right, this week, spurred on by Becky Hammon becoming the first woman to act as a head coach in a regular season NBA game, we shout out some of the women who took over leadership roles in the second half of 2020. And then, in an article from middleclassartist.com, Cindy Sadler argues that weight bias in opera is the last socially acceptable form of discrimination. The contralto, stage director, administrator, author, and advocate goes inside the huddle with Oliver and Ashlee, plus 2-minute drill. Roberto is an officer of the Legion d'Honneur, and Jane is a dame. We're going to get to that towards the end of the show. It's show 250, by the way, if you've been with us from the beginning. 250 in the books. Oliver, one word to describe your holiday.
Cheese.
Weston Williams, one word for your holiday.
Esoteric.
Matt Cummings, one word for your holiday.
Laid back.
And Ashlee Hardgrave, one word.
Freestyle.
Ooh.
A lot of swimming.
So much swimming.
To St. Petersburg.
One word for my holiday. It's going to be 2 words. Propane heater. Let's talk some opera.
Chalk Talk on Opera Box Score.
I didn't realize, George, that you were a fan of King of the Hill.
At the end of 2019, Unsung Kim took over as the music director at San Francisco Opera. Cecilia Bartoli took over as the artistic director in Monte Carlo. This inspired us on the show this week to recap some of the women who took over prominent leadership roles in 2020, specifically the second half of 2020.
We've always pointed out, on the show how opera singers have a tendency to put their people of color, their women, on stage, and the administrative side, the people who can actually pick seasons and actually affect what's chosen for the opera is always it's still old white men. But this past year, despite the pandemic, you actually see a lot of women actually taking on these roles, being given these roles in these really hard times. I mean, a rough time to get appointed to some of these positions. But you really see, I think, a dramatic sort of shift in the way opera companies are hiring. Maybe, fingers crossed, we'll see how well it bears out. But I wanted to call attention to the July announcement of Claire Buravac, who was appointed the general director of the New Orleans Opera, effective in September of this year. She's the first woman to hold the role of the company. She was trained as a violinist initially, but she got her start in opera as a stage manager. She worked in Seattle and Portland. One particularly interesting project she did in Portland was the company's first multilingual production, which was a Spanish and English translation of The Barber of Seville, which is exactly the kind of outreach that we need to ensure that opera remains a relevant art form for the communities that experience it. And so it's not just this separate thing.
Matt Cummings, what was somebody on your radar?
Yeah, I think it was that same week, Charlottesville Opera in Virginia announced their new general director to be Christina Deaton de Morea, who was a Chicago local. She worked for a really long time with the Chicago Children's Choir, and I'm sure all of you are out there saying, but wait, this is an opera podcast. What does a children's choir have to do with it? And Chicago Children's Choir, if you're not familiar with it, if you're not local to Chicago, is a humongous organization. It serves over 5,000 children over all 57 of Chicago's zip codes. And it is, for many, it is fiercely dedicated to musical education for students where it may be the only chance that they get to have that.
Matt, tell us also about the hire in San Francisco, which happened in August.
Yeah, speaking of education, at San Francisco Opera, the San Francisco Opera Center, the training program that includes the famous Marilla apprenticeship program, Carrie Ann Matheson will be joining, has already joined at this point, as the artistic director of that program. She was brought on in the wake of the retirement of longtime director of the Opera Center, Sherry Greenewald, who is a beloved and very admired educator and artist by singers really across the spectrum. And Carrie Ann Matheson herself has come up on this podcast recently when we were talking to Oliver's new bae, Benjamin Bernheim, because she has a prolific career as a pianist. She plays a number of recitals. She worked on the coaching staff of the Metropolitan Opera and Opera Zurich. She also works as a conductor. She works as a coach. She can do it all, and she's going to get to.
What I love about the Matheson appointment and her philosophy is this idea of empowering artists to know their own opinions and that their individual talents are worthy of attention.
Yeah.
I think that is going to take these artists, hopefully it's going to redefine what artist programs are capable of. As we move to the end of August 2020 and into the beginning of September, also heading overseas, two very important appointments. The first one of Andrea Moses to take over the Deutsches Nationaltheater in Weimar. Germany, of course, has two national theaters, one in Mannheim and the other in Weimar. So this is an appointment which is extremely important to it sets the tone for what sort of art Germany as a country and a culture is going to be making in the coming years. Now, I will admit, I saw Moses' production of Freischütz a couple of years ago. I was not thrilled by it. However, her track record, most recently, a leading director in Stuttgart under the team with Yossi Wieler, and she starts in Weimar in the 21-22 season. Secondly, moving over to Austria, Lotte de Beer, the Dutch woman taking over at the Wiener Volksoper, and that starts in September of 21, succeeding Robert Meyer, who's been there since 2007. So something really being shook up now in Vienna. And Vienna kind of is the gold standard. If it isn't for you, at least it is for me as well. De Beer, noted for work at Operafront, which produces small-scale experimental works. In Vienna, also worked at Theater an der Wien, Kammeroper, Staatsoper. Track record is there. I cannot wait to see what she does with a house like the Volksoper, with the rep like the Volksoper. Ashlee, let's bring it back to the U.S. She was on the show for us in October. This is a month after her appointment in Fort Worth.
That is correct. We are talking about the one, the only, the legend, Ms. Afton Battle. She is the first Black female general director for Fort Worth Opera. She is a native Texan, so in a lot of ways she's coming home. She's got experience on a whole bunch of levels. She's a singer, and she's worked in the art and the theater and the ballet worlds before coming back to music. I would definitely encourage you to, both just because it's awesome and she's wonderful and you want to be inspired, go back to our episode. It's 238 in our feed where we talk to her. And she speaks about how part of her approach there, she hit the ground running. She was there in September. She was working in September. She hit the ground running and she said, quote, "We're here to serve our community." So she's really bringing the opera house out into the streets and having it connect with all of the different local organizations that make up the rest of that community, which I think is really wonderful. She's started this thing that is, FWO Go, or FWOGO as they call it sometimes. It's a mobile opera project. It has things like the children's opera Stone Soup. It had this really cool thing, Holiday in the Garden, where they had a big outdoor event, which you can do in Texas in December, that had like a tree farm and food trucks and all this really cool stuff. They did an event at a YMCA where they were doing a food giveaway, and my personal favorite of the FWOGOs was something called Voices for Votes. They put a bunch of singers and a pianist on a flatbed truck, and they drove it around to all of the long lines for people waiting to vote in November in Fort Worth and perform for them. And it was just a really cool way for them to connect with the community. She's really inspirational. She really gets what needs to be I was going to say changed, but I will say improved about the art form of opera and how it relates to the community, and most specifically the communities of Dallas and Fort Worth. So it's a good get for them. She's so boss. She's so great. Just please keep watching her. This is a woman to watch, and she's really going to be a big game changer for opera in the South.
Weston, one of the appointments which put sort of two positions into one body was in Philadelphia.
Yes. So Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Orchestra, decided to grab themselves a new principal guest conductor. But the person they picked is just really, really exciting. It's Natalie Stutzmann, who's both a French contralto and a conductor, and sometimes she's both. There's something so exciting to me when I see a singer go into conducting, because I always feel like they really bring something to the table that others don't have. I feel like, most, usually the pipeline is like, a pianist becomes a conductor.
Sometimes a violinist.
Sometimes a violinist if you're feeling fancy. But, every time I see particularly a woman conductor, which is still sadly a rarity, like Stutzmann, come in here and really bring all of that operatic training, knowing what should be happening in the pit and on the stage, and just bringing out the best of both possible worlds is just such an exciting prospect to me. Even though the Philadelphia Orchestra is not itself, an opera company, I would not be surprised if we see a little bit of that trickling down into the 2021-2022 season, which is when she's going to be taking over, which is incidentally the same season as her conducting debut at the Met, if the Met hasn't been torn apart by union and management negotiations by then.
We're going to get to that in the 2-minute drill. We're going to get to Opera Theater of St. Louis in the 2-minute drill. But Oliver, tell us about the appointment out of there.
Well, Yvette Loynaz has been named. What is her
Director
role?
of Artistic Administration, I believe.
She's doing the hiring and the firing of artists. She started as a singer. She made her bones as a singer. She sang at Caramore, Glimmerglass, Aspen. She is originally from Miami, and she's Cuban American, and she's bilingual. I understand. She probably speaks more than just Spanish, but bilinguality comes into play with I think some of the artistic decisions she's going to make when she's at Opera Theater St. Louis. She has a degree a postgraduate degree from the opera studio in Belgium, the Vlaanderen in Ghent, Belgium. And as she began to transition into administration, she was a fundraiser for the New World Symphony, individual giving. So she's making her bones as a singer. She's making her bones in administration.
So many bones.
She has so many bones, and they're in Spanish too. Now she's she's at Opera Theater St. Louis, and we're going to talk about Opera Theater in the 2-minute drill, and they have an exciting new initiative. So maybe she had a say in that, because it's clear that she is somebody who cares a lot about diversity.
Matt Cummings, wrap it up for us as we go foreign one more time into Canada.
Yeah, both foreign and very non-traditional, with Early Music Vancouver, who announced that Suzy LeBlanc is their first female artistic and executive director. She is a Canadian soprano, an early music specialist. I would even go so far as to say early and new music specialist. Those are specialties that tend to go together. And she has a very non-traditional path to becoming a singer in the first place. She started as a gymnast and has performed with folk ensembles. There's a folk ensemble that she's made recordings with called Melosphere, which is dedicated to Acadian folk music, and she was actually awarded the Order of Canada for contributing to the development of early period music and Acadian culture.
Is the Order of Canada just like a bronzed maple leaf?
At least bronze. I mean,
at least.
No
With
one
a
wants
silver
to be
hockey stick.
no one wants to be rude enough to ask for silver or gold, but
It's a hockey puck. Matt, your Steelers wet the bed against the Browns, allowing them into the playoffs for the first time in 20 years.
they just wanted to, give them a little bit to get them going, but always leave them wanting more. Just like Gypsy Rose Lee. That's how I talk about sports, is through classic Broadway musicals.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
Middle-class artists is something that we are always referring to. And just as we were getting to wrap up our year and think about Messiahs and our last show of 2020, a really interesting piece came out by Cindy Sadler. And it's a shame that it came out so late in the year and it didn't get, I think, enough amplification. So I thought we should definitely bookmark that one to talk about when we came back in January. If you are a professional singer, you probably already have heard of Cindy Sadler. She is one of the moderators of the new forum for classical singers on Facebook.
The new forum.
The new forum. She has done a lot.
Are we up to 3 news now?
Not yet. We're almost there.
She's also known for her advocacy and her teaching. She's always interested in developing young singers and helping them understand the career. She's been a blogger for I don't know how many years. Mezzo with Character is the name of her blog. She's a stage director and she's a singer. So she's just been putting herself out there in so many ways. And this piece is very personal. It's about weight bias. And we literally dive right in, and she does not hold back. Will you help us out by giving us a couple of ground rules or boundaries about how we can talk about this and not, demonstrate implicit bias in our language?
Well, that I will say, first of all, I am not the expert on that. Mm-hmm. I think the best way to avoid implicit bias is to simply, one size doesn't fit all when it comes to that. You have to ask the person you're talking to what they're comfortable with. And there isn't a standard word, among the fat or plus sized community, whatever you want to call them. Some people are comfortable with one thing, some with others. I know that in the fat activist community, the word fat is considered to be neutral. It's a descriptor. It doesn't have morality attached to it. And so for that reason, I chose to use that word a lot in the article that I wrote. But I think if somebody just walked up to me and said, "Hey, you're fat," that would have a very different meaning, because I think most of society does see it as a pejorative, and it shouldn't be. It should be a descriptor. Well,
are there terms that are a little bit more neutral that are like definitely acceptable, like full figured or plus sized, or as? There's lots of euphemisms. They're problematic because almost all of them in some capacity are intended as an insult. Mm-hmm. So it depends on who says it and how and in what context. It's complicated. So, and there's a certain part of me that says, well, why should you even address somebody? You shouldn't address somebody personally about it anyway. It's none of your business. But, if you're just, for practical matters, if you're discussing it, I think saying, plus size is pretty standard. Everybody knows what that means. Curvy is a positive way of saying it. Curvy has, in the context of particularly women, has come to be a term that most people accept and is sort of a positive way of saying it. I don't mind either of those. I wouldn't mind fat in the right context. Mm-hmm. That's something I've been working on just to reclaim for myself and just to say it's not a pejorative. It's just a descriptor. So I'm sorry, I can't be more straightforward with you about that. No, that's okay. It's actually not something I've given a great deal of thought to, believe it or not.
No, I think it's good. Well, first of all, these are the conversations that need to be had. And the fact that this isn't all figured out yet kind of is an indicator of where we are in having sort of a larger discussion about this. I've heard people use plus size. I've heard people sort of lean more on terms that are used in the garment and the fabric industry and say extended size, which I'm sure, fine. I mean, if that works for you, great. You mentioned this article, and we spoke about this a little bit off mic, and I wanted to ask you, now that we have our viewers with us, can you tell us a little bit about how this article kind of came to be? Did it start as something else?
Yes, I'm very tickled about this. I am currently in graduate school for a master's in arts administration at Goucher College, and I wrote it last semester for my performing arts management class. Our teacher, Sarah Lawrence, was very, very big on talking about diversity. But one of the things that I noticed that we didn't really address was body diversity or age diversity on the stage. We did talk about disability, which was really important. I had never heard anybody bring that up in terms of body diversity before. And I think that even though we're here to talk about, body diversity mainly in terms of weight bias, I think it's really important to acknowledge that disability on stage is also not represented. It's probably the least represented of all of the different types of diversity we need to talk about. And, I just want to give a shout out to that, with the idea that to me, that goes along with the whole idea of body diversity. So I wanted to write a paper about all of those things, but it was only a 10-page paper, so there wasn't room. And I decided that I would set that aside. Maybe that'll be my major paper. And I decided to write this paper instead. And so then I published a little bit of it on the New Forum for Classical Singers, which is a 13,000 plus Facebook group for singers.
Don't remind us.
Yeah, and I've been a moderator of it, God help me, since 2012. So I posted something about there on there. I also drew from people, from that community to get anecdotes. I often go to them because there's all these singers and people in peripheral careers there to talk to. So, I'll say, hey guys, I'm writing an article about whatever. And then people will very generously tell me their stories. So I got pages and pages and pages of stories, much more than I could actually use. And they were heartbreaking a lot of the time. So anyway, Zach Finkelstein saw that and wrote me and said, hey, Cindy, and he'd been asking me to write something for him anyway. And he said, hey, let's publish this article and I'll pay you. And I was like, I'm getting paid to write a paper for class. Yay.
So the abstract of the piece for middle class artists is that this bias against people who are different body sizes actually damages the business. And from audiences not seeing themselves represented on stage to how young artists and professional artists are treated and maybe not given opportunities, and many other points along the way. But one of the arguments you make is that marketing campaigns perpetuate this bias. Can you talk to me about some marketing campaigns that show this? And you don't have to name opera companies, but just so we can illustrate this point for our audience.
Right.
How this is hurtful to our community. So, yeah.
I will not name any names. Well, just to start off generally, one of the things that you very often see with opera marketing campaigns is that they will hire models to do the shoots for the opera.
I'm booked. Gosh, I'm sorry.
There's like so many of these out there, and it just sort of happens on a regular basis. And I remember the first time I saw one, and I kind of went, I've never seen a Rosina that looks like that. Sure, there's lots of gorgeous girls out there, but you can tell that's a model. And I don't get what the point of that is. To me, it's almost like false advertising. I mean, there are many gorgeous singers in opera. If gorgeous is what you're looking for, choose one of them. And by the way, fat is not excluded from gorgeous. Fat can be absolutely beautiful too. And that's one of the things that is important to me, that, as an arts administrator, as a writer, as an advocate, is to normalize the idea that old people fall in love, fat people fall in love, short people fall in love, people of different races and colors have adventures. It's not just young, skinny, Eurocentric people. And I think that, that's a big focus of the article as well. But you asked about marketing campaigns, so back to that. Sorry, it's hard to keep me off the soapbox.
Welcome to my world. Come sit next to me.
So the modeling thing is one. Another thing that I have been told, I haven't seen this personally, but I've been told by other singers that they have, and these are not, by the way, singers who were anyway overweight, that companies would Photoshop their photos. They'd use their photos in the marketing, but they'd Photoshop them to make them look thinner. Right. I personally had a company a very beloved company that hired me many times, asked me for a picture of one of my signature roles. And instead of taking the most recent one, which was probably had the best production values and had the best costume and, lighting and everything, they took the oldest one, which was like practically an amateur set, because I was the skinniest in that one. And the photo wasn't even a professional photo, but they'd rather have that than show me, in this other, even better production values, even though I was fatter. And by the way, fat or thin had nothing to do with that character. That character could be played by any body type. So, that's just one of the ways. And it's, it's a microaggression, because it's saying to the performer, you're not good enough the way you are. We're afraid you won't sell, and we're not going to take the time to make you look as beautiful as we want you to look. We're just going to alter an image, or we're going to use somebody else. And that's happened too. I've heard from singers who were in the quote unquote A cast, whose photos didn't appear in the advertising. They put the skinnier B cast singer in. And then those are sort of the generalities, but there's a couple of particularly egregious campaigns.
Okay, I'm ready.
That come to mind. Buckle your seatbelts. So there was this one, and a bunch of people are going to know exactly which one I'm talking about, even though I'm not going to name names. But there was a campaign where this opera company had a truly beautiful singer. And I feel really bad for her that she got mixed up in this. I don't think any of the backlash was directed at her, but they put a picture of, that stereotypical picture of the fat lady in the breastplate and, the fat Brunhilde, and they always give her like bad drag queen makeup. They always make her look ugly. Nobody ever makes her look like voluptuous Christine Gurkey kind of, gorgeous Brunhilde, but they make her look like, somebody in a community theater production, no budget, and they juxtaposed that and said something along the lines of, if you think this is opera, no, this is opera. And then they show their beautiful, gorgeous singer. Well, that got a big backlash, at least from the singing community, because I remember all the memes that went around with people, showing off themselves and saying, hey, this is also opera. So, and the person who created the campaign fortunately realized the mistake and pulled it. But, the damage was done. That person was not in favor with singers for a long time. And another one was, and this was in the past, and this was a bigger opera company that had a slogan that was something along the lines of, we make opera worth seeing. So in other words, hey, you're not going to see any of those fatties on our stage, because that's almost always what they mean. Yeah. They don't mean you're not going to see anybody who isn't Hollywood beautiful. They mean you're not going to see fat people on our stage. So, let's just call it what it is.
That is, yeah. I mean, yeah, all I can do is nod. I remember each of these campaigns, and I remember how small, or rather unsmall, it made me feel as I saw those, especially training as an artist to go to these big leagues. I love what you said a moment ago about fat not being excluded from the notion of gorgeous. And I want to turn a little bit and talk about another thing that can often be excluded, that fat can be excluded from, and that's fat and healthy. There are plenty of people that are pictures of health, but would be considered by someone's standards as fat. And that often goes into, weight bias and training and young artist programs and the way that stage directors cast. I appreciate that you made the point about thin bodies being assumed to be the healthy ones, the better movers, the better actors. I would like to give you the opportunity to talk about people who sort of defy that notion, people who are outstanding performers, but might not be considered conventionally thin and the thin version of healthy.
Okay, well, Ashlee, let me preface this by saying I don't mean to attack you. But when I look at this question, I thought about this question, and as I was trying to think of these people, and I mean, I can think of those people, I thought, wait a minute, would we ask that question of another marginalized community. And, would we say...
I'm going to say right now, it's my question.
Okay, I'm sorry. All right.
It's my question.
I'm not, and please don't think I'm attacking anybody. This is just me thinking out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
No, thank you. That's what this is for.
There's certainly no rancor on my part at all. Would we ask a question like that of some other marginalized community? Would we say, can you give me examples of people who are really articulate and defy that stereotype? No, we wouldn't, because that would be offensive. Yeah. And so to me, what I'm really happy that you asked this question, because it was actually a light bulb moment for me to say, this is the whole thing about otherness. This is making those people other. Even though they're fat, they do this, they can move. No, fat people are not any different. They don't have different abilities than skinny people per se. It's individual. I cannot get on my knees at this point because I injured myself at the gym years ago and then tore a meniscus. If you just looked at me, you would think, she's not a spring chicken and she's pretty fat, so maybe she can't get up and down off her knees easily. I can't now, but it's only been like the last 5 years that's been the case. And I've been a big girl my whole career with a very, very short respite where I lost a lot of weight and then I slowly gained it all back. But I have always been an athletic fat person. And I still go out and hike with my husband. That's our hobby. Us two, chubby people are out there hiking and having a good time. And so I don't think that that's really, I think that when we look at a question like that, we have to say, why are we asking that? Why do we have to prove? Or what are we trying to prove? And to whom are we trying to prove it? So I think the better question is, why do we want to ask questions like that about fat people? Why do we have to defend them? Why do we have to defend them on stage? Why is a director not creative enough to, let me rephrase that. If a director is creative enough to work around, okay, I'll give you an example. Mark Delaman, great Verdi baritone. I've worked with him a number of times before he got to be the big deal, and I've worked with him a little bit afterwards. Lovely guy. The last time I saw him, he had just torn a meniscus and was in a lot of pain and was on a set that required him to go up and down stairs. And having had a torn meniscus myself, I can tell you that's a lot of pain. And he just bravoed his way through it. But, I'm sure the director made some accommodations for him. He couldn't kneel with that leg. Nobody said to Stephanie Blythe, who was also in the same production, nobody was going to, they were going to make accommodations for her because she's a big deal and she's a fantastic performer and you don't mess with her. And she makes that pretty clear in a very lovely way. But, somebody who is at the regional level, who's building their career or isn't well established yet and is singing in a big house, they're not going to necessarily get those accommodations made for them. Why not? Why can't we make an accommodation for a singer who is, who uses a wheelchair? There were people who used a wheelchair in the 1800s. Why don't we make accommodations for singers who are partially deaf? Because there are singers who are partially deaf out there having careers right now. Of course, they don't talk about it very much. There are blind singers having careers. There are fat singers and thin singers and everything in between. Why are we so committed to showing such a narrow range of humanity on the stage? And why are we so committed to a repertoire that traditionally has shown that and told stories about those people? We're coming out of a pandemic. The opera world, the arts world has been shook. We all know that. There's all this talk about how we're going to rebuild. What are we going to do? We have a lot of work to do to come back. This is the perfect time to fix this stuff. And not only that, but we all know that audience building is a challenge. And yet, why then, and this is where the damage to the profession comes in, to the arts comes in, we insist on not representing. We fight with our boards and our patrons over representation. And I'm talking about all kinds of representation, not just weight bias, because it's all part of the same piece. We fight with these people over it, and yet we still can't get them to give us enough money. And we're shutting out those audiences because young audiences are very smart. The kids that are coming up in the generations after mine and, a couple of generations after mine, they're smart and they have really different values. They don't have anything to lose the way my generation did. I was really lucky to be, one of kind of those last generations that got out, and when you could still start a career without being in so much debt. And now they're all in debt, and now they're all, they will never be able to buy a house or, do some of the things that we took for granted. So they don't have anything to lose, and they're the social justice generation, and they're not having it. And this is one of the things I adore about the young people of today. They are not having any of that BS. They want to see representation on stage. Why aren't we giving them that? Why aren't we engaging them that way? I run a program called Spotlight on Opera. This is our 15th season this year. And I have had students say to me, I don't want to play that role. I mean, she just gets walked all over. I'm not interested in playing roles like that. I'm not interested in my character being sexually harassed on stage. And my answer to that is, if we're doing traditional repertoire, we have to find a way to do that illustrates the message we want to illustrate. That's a very big thing for me. It has been in my own career as well. But they don't want it anymore. So we have to find ways to bring them in and give them the representation that they want and deserve. And it's healthier, not just for the performing arts, not just for opera, but for society.
Agreed.
So maybe the question should have been, can you tell us who's mediocre out there? Let's
You
just
want to get me blackballed?
who are the singers out there that don't deserve to be on stage, regardless of what category we might put them into? No, I'm just kidding. All right, so we are almost running out of time, but I have one more question for you. Is there something that you would prefer we would have asked you?
Well, one thing that we didn't address that I'd really like to get in there before we leave is the effect of weight bias and body diversity bias on young singers. And it's a heavy burden, not only psychologically, but also in terms of their vocal technique. I spoke to many singers who said that they had been forced into singing repertoire that was inappropriate for them, which is damaging. Ashlee, you had that experience. I was stunned to see how many people had that. But it's vocal malpractice. These kids are spending thousands of dollars. They're going into debt for their music degrees, which I think is a terrible idea, by the way. But it's easy for me to say that because I didn't have to do it. And then they come out and their technique is not usable. And in fact, it is so unusable that they have to spend years to fix it. And it's just unconscionable that teachers would do this. And I understand why they do, because they're trying to give the student their best shot at having a career. But how messed up is that? Just because you're 5'2" and a tenor with a leading man voice, or you're bald and a tenor, and people don't want to cast you as a leading man because you're short.
Yep.
That's another example of how how body diversity works against, or the lack of normalization of body diversity works against people. So, I mean, obviously I have a whole lot to say about that. I could talk your ears off for a lot more time. But, I would just like to leave people with the idea that, to think about it. The arts are meant to be for everyone. They're also meant to be controversial and thought-provoking and a force for change in society. And historically, they have been. And for a long time in the arts, we've been saying diversity, diversity, diversity. Every arts organization in the world, has some sort of Black Lives Matter statement on their website. But who's putting their money where their mouth is? And I think that we need to be, as arts administrators, as singers, as artists, as art lovers, we need to be demanding this of ourselves, of the companies that we patronize. We need to be educating those who need a little education. And we need to be making this a reality. We need to put that representation on the stage. And I personally believe that is what opera in the 21st century looks like.
Well, Cindy Sadler, people can read the article at middleclassartist.com. We've been talking about that website forever now, so they know where to find it. And they can also learn more about you at cindysadler.com.
Yes, and I if I may just plug, I have
Please.
a lot of articles there on topics that are germane to the arts. Not shy about giving my opinions, surprisingly enough.
Clearly.
We love it. Our kind of people.
So
gotta wipe the egg off my face after this.
I write a lot for young artists and like how-tos and try to demystify the business for people. So I invite them to. It's free. It's all there on my blog on my website. So check it out.
Well, thank you for coming on to Opera Box Score.
Yes.
Thanks for inviting me. This was so much fun.
This just in. The 2-minute drill.
All right, listen up. Here's everything you need to know about what happened in Operaland this week.
The Met Orchestra Musicians Union have responded to the Metropolitan Opera's decision to use non-union musicians for its New Year's Eve gala. In the statement, Union President Adam Krauthammer says, "Let's be clear. Hiring non-Met musicians under the banner of the Metropolitan Opera and outsourcing the orchestra's work is an attack on the Met as an artistic institution and an insult to the very artists who work there."
New York City Opera's Musicians Union has settled with the beleaguered company's management. NYCO Committee Chair Mark Schumann said, quote, "This is an excellent example of what can be achieved when we act together as a union."
In other NYCO news, City Opera has released Un Zumo en Maschera. The promotion serves as a fundraiser for NYCO and features a star-studded lineup of singers, including Elizabeth Buttrell, LaTanya Moore, Patricia Racette, Samuel Ramey, Paulo Jot, Carol Vanis, Rolando Villazon, Frederica von Stade, and Martina Arroyo.
Splendidissimo! Opera Theater of St. Louis is launching a fellowship program to recruit and train arts administrators of color. Of the 3 named fellows, 2 are Black and 1 is Latina. Chandler Johnson will work in artistic administration, Quentin Beverly in fundraising, and Leanne Alvarado in general administration.
Katharina Wagner, Intendantin of the Bayreuther Festspiele, has said that she was pleased with the intention of the German federal government to review the festival's administration practices. Structural issues? In my Wagner festival? It's more likely than you think.
9. The Sydney Opera House has resumed performances, reopening with The Merry Widow. Audiences are obliged to wear masks, and capacity is capped at 75%. Artistic director Lyndon Terracini said, "Walking back into the theater was a very emotional time for everyone. I think throughout the year, other opera houses will be opening very soon, and people will be coming back to the theater with a sense of hope."
She must mean opera houses just in Australia. It was a big month in the land of fancy honorifics. In the UK, conductor Jane Glover has been made a dame in the 2021 New Year's Honours for services to music, alongside the Birmingham Opera Company's founder and artistic director Graham Vick, who has been knighted. Tenor Roberto Alagna became an officier of Légion d'honneur in France. Countertenor and conductor Daniel Taylor has been named an Officer of the Order of Canada. And in America, Oliver has been named Opera Podcast Royalty.
Exit stage right, the author and scholar Florence Badol-Bertrand died in Saint-Étienne on December 26th. In addition to being one of France's top musicologists, Ms. Badol-Bertrand was one of the founder and artistic director of the musical festival in Vivray-Lignon.
A star of La Scala, Liceo, Wiener Staatsoper, and the Deutsche Oper Berlin, Italian tenor Angelo Mori has died at the age of 86. Mori was trained by Marcello del Monaco, the brother of Mario del Monaco, and he made his debut in Rigoletto as the Duke in 1961.
Sándor Solyom-Nagy has died at the age of 79. The Hungarian baritone was esteemed especially as an interpreter of Wagner and was associated with the Bayreuth Festival from 1981 to 2002 for a total of 238 performances.
Romanian mezzo-soprano Maria Maxim Nicoara has died at the age of 52 after suffering a fall in May 2020. Nicoara was a member of the Romanian National Opera in Iași, where she performed supporting roles in many operas.
And on this day, January 4th, in 1710, it was the birth of Italian composer Giovanni Battista Pergolesi. In 1720, it was the birth of German composer Johann Friedrich Agricola, author of Introduction to the Art of Singing. 1822, happy birthday to Italian tenor Alfredo Tedeschi in Sicily. 1889, it was the first performance of Wagner's Das Rheingold in New York City at the Met. In 1893, it was the birth of French baritone André Bourget in Toulouse. In 1909, it was the birth of American mezzo-soprano Anna Cascas. In 1931, American bass baritone Edward Pearson was born in Chicago. In 1937, it was the birth of American soprano Grace Bumbry in St. Louis. 1938 held the first performance of Jussi Björling in America, New York City. And in 1954, it was the birth of German tenor Peter Seifert in Düsseldorf.
And that's your 2-minute drill. Matt, over at the Met, what did the singers know? When did they know it?
Yeah, so this is not great on the Met. Their year-end gala, they decided to go with some scabs.
No,
Okay, wait. Let's back this up a little bit.
Okay.
Let's back this up. We're
The
talking about
orchestral musicians.
we're talking
Yes.
about
Yes.
the musicians who are non-contract, non-union, who played in the online gala, but we're also talking about 4 singers who were the stars of this gala. Our friend Matthew Polenzani, Javier Camarena, fellow Mexican, Pretty Yende, and Angel Blue. There has been talk about, how disappointed singers in the singing community are because these 4 singers agreed to go on in this.
Yes, and my response is I too am disappointed if they knew ahead of time that this was going to be the setup.
Right.
And if there was a way for them to get out of this and they did not, then yes, I'm incredibly disappointed. But as someone who is often the last to know about lots of things, that was my first thought, is like, I wonder if they even knew. And if they did find out and it was too late, that's a really tough case too. I definitely, I'm not encouraging anybody to walk over picket lines for gigs, but it was just something I thought about.
But that's a serious act of hardball for the Met in these
100%.
orchestral.
It really is.
Yeah.
I know, like, my social media feed was just like full of vitriol. Like, people. I mean, the Met, I feel like, has been mishandling the pandemic since day one, and this just felt like just a step like way over the line.
It seems like it seems like they're just spitting in the union's faces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They woke up and chose violence.
I don't know how they're going to come back from this. I don't know how they're going to come back from this.
And then across town at New York City Opera, Oliver, I detected a
Across
note
town, they're in the same.
Across a sidewalk.
I don't know where
They're
they
not
don't
in
have a
Lincoln
home
Center
anymore.
anymore.
Yeah.
It's across town if you take like the long way, the scenic route. You walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. It's
Up
nice.
to Yonkers, back down.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
where's their home? They don't have a home anymore. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
That's the joke. Oliver, I noted a tone of disappointment in your voice about the roster for these.
Well, I made the mistake of thinking that these people are going to be singing, but I haven't seen this Un Ballo in Maschera
I did.
thing. Yeah, is it singing or is it just talking?
It's an ad.
Okay.
It's a charming ad, and it's delightful, and it's amazing to see that they got that many people to come and like ask for support. But it's 2.5 minutes of all your favorites wearing a mask and then taking it off and smiling and asking you to save arts. That's it.
Okay, because if they had like Frederica von Stade and Carol Van Ness and Martina Arroyo and Samuel Raimi like singing into their laptops, that'd be something else. But that's all right.
I mean, how many chances does Nyko get? That's my question. Like, they have had many
company that never dies.
Yeah, really.
Well, I mean, if the Met can't bounce back from this, there's going to be room for another big dog in town. So they can make a couple more of those mask ads. Might be time.
Just biding their time.
Oliver, you mentioned this earlier on in the show back at Opera Theater of St. Louis, the administrative arts.
Yeah, well, it's so funny that we're doing a story about essentially interns. But, I mean, they want us to know that they are deliberately, hiring people of color to, learn in this fellowship and how to be an arts administrator. And that's what we've been talking about. So this is a step in the right direction. And, when there are not that many jobs right now for anybody, these 3 young people are getting, groomed to, take on some of these roles behind the scenes. And you could one day become Alexander Neath and have like 10 jobs like all over the world.
I mean, that really is the sort of like, you're working in the arts field. Your dream is to have like 12-day jobs and barely scraping through. It's such a mood.
And as long as only 3 of them are waiting tables, then you really made it.
But maybe this is Yvette Loina's initiative. So if it is, good job, Yvette. Muchas gracias.
Weston, maybe Bayreuth could take a page or 2 out of OTSL's book.
Yeah. So this is kind of a funny thing because the tone of this story is just very German. Like Katerina's just saying, "Oh yeah, I'm fine if the government comes in and checks. There's nothing under this rug that you have to worry about." We should be clear when we say structural issues, we're not talking about the actual building. We're more talking about, how the finances, how ticket prices are happening, making sure the government, which is a very large investor in Bayreuth, make sure that things are running smoothly. And because they're one of the largest shareholders of the festival. They own about 29% of the shares. And they recently pledged 84 million euros or something like that to renovations, which is a big chunk of the 178 million it takes to fix it up. So they're very concerned about the investment. And meanwhile, I just know that Katerina's Wagner genes are just like hackles raised, ready to run with the prospect of debt from these national organizations. Just like her
when has the Wagner family ever had problems with debt?
I love all the drama, like even like the minor drama with the Wagner family. I think it should absolutely be a Netflix show, just like the whole dynasty, just like
Netflix's
piling on each
answer
other.
to Succession.
I would love it.
It'd be phenomenal. It's almost as phenomenal as Graham Vick getting a knighthood. Listen. Being a UK citizen, I do follow the New Year's honors and the Queen's birthday honors very closely, and it is a big deal. Graham Vick is such an important stage director. He really, through the Birmingham Opera Company, mainstreamed the idea of 2 things, of community opera. Hang on, we're going to get the Sharpie up. Of community opera and of site-specific opera. And the work that he did, connecting the people of the city of Birmingham, which is a much maligned city in the UK, connecting the people of the city of Birmingham to take part in opera, to perform an opera, to watch opera, is absolutely unbelievable. Simultaneously, to do it in spaces that were immersive, site-specific, where the public could really connect to the artists and the art form. It is just so incredible and very much deserved.
As a native of Birmingham, Alabama, I support my sister city's efforts in the opera world.
Birmingham, UK, also a sister city to Chicago, a little known fact. And Jane Glover becoming a dame. Well, I was just going to say Jane Glover becoming a dame as well is phenomenal. The first opera that I ever was an AD on at Chicago Opera Theater was conducted by Jane Glover. So
Abduction?
Abduction with a Sorrel.
You were an AD on that?
That was me, baby.
That was one of the best things that COT has ever done.
Oh,
that
thanks.
show.
I
It was
appreciate
quite good. It was quite good.
Yeah. There is some staging in there, which I'd like to take credit for.
I was talking about this.
I'm out of drink. I can't drink anymore.
So speaking of honorifics, it occurred to me that, George, you probably don't know this, but because you don't go on the internet very much, but earlier today I was named one to watch by our friends at OSEA in 2021 as a content creator, or as they call it, an op culture creator, for my work on WFMT and on Opera Box Score. And of course, Michael Rice jumped in right away and said, "What? Why no mention of opera now?" And also, why no mention of the rest of you guys? Because I couldn't do it without you.
Well, you could,
But it is getting a bit meta, because like we had them on the show to promote them, and now they're promoting us. So, it's like the snake that eats its own. What? I forget.
an Ouroboros.
That's just networking, baby. That's networking.
An Ouroboros of networking.
A it's not gonna happen.
There was no joke there,
But I
Ashlee. I'm
appreciate
sorry.
you tried.
You have to.
I really wanted it to. Guys, I've had good intentions all night, and all of my jokes are falling flat, and it makes me sad. And this is the lady episode, and I'm the only actual lady on this panel. I really thought I would be on fire tonight.
Yeah. We didn't really set up the lady thing at the beginning very well, because we were too busy talking about like cheese and laid back or whatever that was.
It's very important. It's crucial.
Let's definitely wrap this show up.
Good call. Bad call. On Opera Box Score.
I'm going to go first, actually, because I got two.
Ooh.
Listening to the Festival of Nine Lessons and Carols from King's College, Cambridge is a family tradition in our household. This year it was a little different. Great New York Times article on the bizarre curveballs that were thrown to the King's College choir in the age of COVID. The repertoire was fantastic, beautifully executed, and it's available through the BBC through the end of January. Oliver Camacho, you got a good call or a bad call?
Friend of the show, Zachary James, who always seems to be in our good calls. His film with pianist Charity Wicks of the song cycle by Persis Partial Vehar and poet George Clawater, called The Unity of Men and Love, has been named as an official entrant in the Chicago Indie Film Awards. Congratulations, Zach and your team.
Matt Cummings.
For the next month, operavision.eu has a very cool, very visually striking production of Semele from the Camacho Opera Berlin that was directed by Barry Kosky. It's from 2018. And just the little teaser video is pretty freaking cool. So check the whole thing out. It's available until February 3rd. But who knows with time zones how that's going to go. So just try to get on there before that.
Weston Williams, as usual, the silent giant. Ashlee Hardgrave.
Well, in keeping with the ladies in leadership terrain that we have for this episode, this is actually for me and Matt, but I went ahead and took over this time. I want to celebrate Deb Haaland, who on one of our last episodes, we didn't get a chance to talk about her. She's the New Mexico Congresswoman. She's going to be the first Native American member of the United States cabinet in our country's history. She's going to take over Secretary of the Interior. It is really something to have a Laguna Pueblo woman be in charge of how we use our country's land. So, bravo, ladies. Bravo, America. You got something right for once. Let's keep that train going.
Finally, we've talked about it on the show before, a film called Messiah Complex, created through the Against the Grain company with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. It is a version of selections from Messiah. That's available streaming online now through January 31st. That was supposed to wrap up, I believe, this week. There is still time to check out one of the most moving and beautifully shot takes on Handel's Messiah. That's it for this week's edition of America's Talk radio show about opera. Our announcer is Norm Woodel at normwoodel.com, NORMWOODEL.com. On Facebook, search for Opera Box Score. Be sure to share and comment on our posts on Twitter and Instagram. We're at Opera Box Score. A podcast version of our show is available on SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts, and links to this episode's content at operaboxscore.com. The views and opinions expressed on Opera Box Score are solely those of the show's creative team. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of the accounts of this show without the express written consent of Opera Box Score would be totally cool. Our creative consultant's Oliver Camacho. Our audio and video editor is Weston Williams. For our guests, Sydney Sadler, and your co-hosts, Matt Cummings and Ashlee Hardgrave, I'm George Cederquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera while someone records it and leaks it to the press. We're back with an all-new show next week. You'll get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more scratching out the 0 in 2020 and replacing it with a 1. Join us.